So you've probably been in this situation before. You go out, you shoot your video, you're feeling really, really good. Video looks great, things are just clicking. Then you get home, you put the video in your editing software, and you pull it up, and you're like, oh, this doesn't look like I thought it looked when I was shooting it. And you just can't put your finger on it. Something's just off. The highlights are blown out, or the shadows are just crushed and grainy. And you're sitting here thinking, what happened? This looked fine when I shot it. You're probably wondering, how do I really know if the exposure in my video is correct while I'm shooting it so I can avoid this whole situation? Well, I'm happy to say that there is a tool built into almost every single camera ever made that you can use to get it right every time. That tool is called Histogram, and that's what we're going to be discussing in this video. So what is a histogram? A histogram is a graph showing exactly where all the brightness or darkness lives inside your image. That's it. It's a map or a chart that shows you exactly how bright or dark your image is and where the highlights and the shadows fall. So here's how to read a histogram. The left side of your histogram represents shadows. The right side of your histogram represents highlights. In the middle are your midtones. The taller the peaks are at any given point, the more pixels that exist at that specific brightness level. So for example, if you're shooting a dark scene or a really moody scene, similar to what you're seeing right here, you're going to see the peak of the histogram shift to the left of the histogram. And on the other side of the spectrum, if you're shooting something really bright or outside and just an image that's really, really exposed and very bright, you'll see the opposite. Peak will be on the right side of the histogram. And ultimately, the goal is to have the peak directly in the center to get a nice, well-balanced image. Now here's really the key thing to remember so you don't overcomplicate things. It's not so much so important that you keep that peak in the very center of the graph. What you really should be paying attention to are the edges of the histogram, the left and the right side. So if that peak in your histogram is all bunched up to the left side of your histogram, that means your shadows are crushed and you're losing all the detail in your shadows. And vice versa, when all of that information is crushed into the right side of your histogram, that means your highlights are blown out and you're losing highlight detail. The reason why this is super important to pay attention to is because once you've clipped your highlights or darkened your shadows past pure black or your highlights past pure white, you have lost all the detail forever. So in post-production, you can't pull those details back. The goal when you shoot is to retain all the highlight information that you can outside of like the sun or light bulbs, small exceptions like that, and retain all of the shadow detail outside of stuff you want to be pure black and crushed if you're going for a specific look. And then in post-production, you can push those their separate ways if you want that look in post-production. This essentially gives you the choice to crush your shadows in post-production or blow out your highlights in post-production for a creative choice. If you shoot the video like that, however, you don't get that option in post-production. You've made your choice, and now you have to lie in the bed that you've created, which is okay sometimes if you really want to make a creative choice, and that's just what you're doing with your film or your video. So if moody and dark is the direction you're going for, and you want those shadows to be completely crushed, and you're shooting like a really, really dark room, and you want it to seem like the character's in a really, really dark room and it's really scary, or it's really ominous and you want them to feel isolated, that may be a choice that you want to make while you're shooting your video to crush those shadows, and vice versa for the highlights. I would say it's more often that people try to crush the shadows when they're shooting rather than clip their highlights, because crushing your shadows and having an image be more contrasty is usually going to look better than clipping your highlights. If you clip your highlights anytime, your video is more than likely going to look pretty amateur. When in doubt, protect your highlights. Expose for the brightest important thing that you're wanting to focus on in your scene, and then work from there. Because ultimately, digital cameras nowadays can recover shadow information way better than they can recover clipped highlight information. Clipped highlight information is almost impossible to recover. If something is a little too dark whenever you shoot it and you're in the post-production process and you're color grading, you can usually lift it up a little bit if you want to retain some of those details. And usually it looks fine. But if your highlights are blown out or something is clipped in your highlights that you really wanted to focus on, you're crap out of luck, usually. So when it comes to your histogram, the way you do this is to allow a little extra space on the right side of your histogram. This allows for more highlight information being retained, and it kind of favors your highlights in that way. Now, I do want to mention that histogram is not the only exposure tool out there. In fact, it's one of the most remedial, it's one of the most beginner exposure tools that you can use and that most people do use. The reason that beginners use it the most is because it's, in my opinion, the most simple and straightforward to understand as a beginner. Professional cinematographers and video producers use histogram, waveform, false color, and zebras. These are all different kinds of exposure tools that we'll talk about later on in different videos. But for now, I think histogram for you, since you're a beginner, is easily the most simple tool for exposure that you could be focusing on right now. And the great thing about histogram, it's almost in every single camera, from the highest end to the lowest end. It's hard to find a camera that doesn't have histogram. And once you learn how to use it, it'll immediately level up your footage. Now, once you get a little bit of experience under your belt, you can kind of figure out how to use your LCD screen in the proper way in conjunction with your histogram. But most beginners make the mistake of trusting what they see on their LCD screen, which is like a little 3-inch, screen. You can't really see what's going on in terms of your exposure. And that's why learning histogram is such an important skill, an invaluable skill that you can learn right now as a beginner, because once you learn how to use histogram, you'll stop trusting your LCD screen and you'll start trusting the actual information on your histogram that shows you exactly where your exposure is on your entire image. So here's an exercise you can do right now to practice with your histogram. Set your camera up on a tripod, point it at something bright and dark, so maybe a window next to a wall, and make sure your histogram is turned on. And I want you to do 2 things. First, start by adjusting your ISO or your shutter speed to intentionally blow out or overexpose your image. And as you do this, watch what happens to your histogram. What you're gonna see is all that information and that peak that was in the middle is going to pile up against the right side of your histogram completely. It's gonna go flat. That's what happens when your highlights clip. That data is being completely lost and destroyed. Now, go the other way. Turn your ISO down or turn your shutter speed up, and what's going to happen in turn is all of that peak that was once in the middle is going to slam against the left side of your histogram, and it's going to go flat, just like we did with the highlight information just a second ago. And just like the highlight information, all of that shadow information is destroyed, and it's completely gone. Now, bring your shutter speed or your ISO back to a middle ground where you start to see the histogram go from here on the left side of your image all the way back to the center, so you can get a nice, well-exposed image. And once you see the relationship between the left and the right side of your histogram as you adjust the exposure of your image up and down, you'll start to kind of understand this dance of watching the histogram and adjusting your exposure as you're shooting a video. And this is the relationship that you really need to understand to use histogram properly. Now let me walk you through a real-world example of how I would use histogram on a real set. So whenever I walk into a space that I'm shooting in, generally one of the first things I do after I set up my frame is I look at my histogram. I look at 2 things. Are my highlights clipping on the right side? Or my shadows clipping on the left side? If I see the right edge spiking or going up against that wall, I know it's overexposed. I need to bring it down. And vice versa, if it's all the way to the left, I know the exposure's far too low and I need to bring it up. So once I realize this, I would either add light, subtract light, throw on an ND filter, lower my ISO, raise my ISO. You can do many different things to raise or lower the exposure of your image. So here are a few things to keep in mind before we wrap the video up. The histogram is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's just that. It's a tool. One piece of the puzzle in terms of mastering your camera and getting really good professional looking images. There's no real perfect histogram shape to have for all of your videos. Meaning if you shoot a dark moody scene, your histogram is naturally going to lean left, and that's okay. And vice versa, if you're shooting a high key commercial, it's going to be leaning to the right or closer to the middle, and that's okay. You just have to understand what look you're going for in your video and understand what the histogram is supposed to look like to achieve that look. Ultimately, understanding your histogram will give you the ability to protect the brightest and darkest parts of your image, and it essentially gives guidelines. You know how when you're bowling, they have those, gutter guards where if you go too far to one side, it's going to bounce you right back, or too far to the left side, it's going to bounce you right back. The histogram is kind of like this. So if you go too far to the right, you know that if it's flat, you need to bring it back a little bit. If you go too far to the left, if it's flat, you need to bring it back a little bit. It's essentially something that just helps you protect the highlights and the shadows of your image. So you have the best chance in post-production to get the best looking image possible. Well, that is a comprehensive overview of histograms, what they are, and how to use them to get the exposure correct on your videos. My name is Hayden Cornfloss, and I am an in-house video producer for an 8-figure national brand here in the USA. And this channel exists to teach you exactly how to do what I do, which is make beautiful, engaging videos and ultimately build a career for yourself in the video production world. If that's something you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button as we post weekly videos talking about anything from tangible technical skills in video production all the way to theoretical skills. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in the next one.